Welcome to this month's broadcast.
Yes, hello there and welcome. I'm Lloyd Evans and you're watching the Cedars channel from the bunker, and in this video we absolutely must talk about the May 2020 JW Broadcasting episode, which, as you've just seen, is hosted by none other than governing body member Stephen Lett. Now, there is a heck of a lot to get through, so without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
Always rejoice is the appealing theme of this year's conventions. The governing body would like to give you a preview of the program. Let's take a look.
So I've already done a response video to the promotional material that Watchtower has put out regarding the Always Rejoice 2020 convention, which we now know will not be going ahead, at least not in the usual way, because of COVID-19. This convention will basically be held using a series of videos that will be released on jw.org in July and August. Again, I don't want to repeat myself. There's plenty more things I need to talk about in this particular rebuttal. So if you want to see my thoughts on the promotional material, please do check out the video.
That preview reminds us of the wonderful convention program of last year, including the feature film about faithful Josiah. What was involved in producing that drama? Please watch the following video that reveals what transpired behind the scenes.
Where do you begin an important project, like the story of Josiah, love Jehovah, hate what is bad? You begin with prayerful consideration. It's a serious responsibility, part of being loyal to Jehovah and His Word. Therefore, many hours of careful research goes into the first step, writing a script. The script is then visualized through a step called storyboarding. But it's not just the script and storyboarding that requires attention to accuracy. Costumes must be thoroughly researched so that their components, styles, colors, and even the types of fabrics appear as historically accurate as possible. The production must also accurately depict the times being represented while making the best use of donated funds. How can this be done? For the story of Josiah, the solution was to film at Bethel locations, such as the studio spaces at Mount Ebo. Set construction began early in 2018. The production team designed and built 3 flexible sets so that with easy prop adjustments, they could be in multiple locations. Even the exterior Jerusalem city scenes were filmed indoors. Many brothers and sisters from local congregations served as extras for the crowd scenes. With an eye to biblical and historical accuracy, the makeup team transformed the actors into characters from King Josiah's time.
So what we have here is a segment that seems intended to impress Jehovah's Witnesses regarding the lengths that the organization went to in producing the Josiah drama, which was shown at last year's convention. Now, I obviously had a lot to say about the Josiah drama. I found it incredibly disturbing, particularly the way it portrayed the bloodlust of Josiah in basically killing anyone who wouldn't recognize the worship he was insisting on. It was basically Watchtower's fantasy of an ISIS-style caliphate that I'm sure the governing body would relish ruling in if they had the opportunity, but we'll get to all of that later. What can we say about the production? Because I can tell you that watching this as a Jehovah's Witness years ago, I would have just found this fascinating, I would have been looking at this as evidence that this is Jehovah's organization, because wow, look at how they're using technology. Look at how you have all of these people coming together in a common cause and laboring over all of these different details to create something that's visually stunning. The truth is, though, that what we're seeing here is very ordinary when it comes to filmmaking. I've seen what film sets look like, and it's given me more of an appreciation for the art of filmmaking and how much teamwork is involved and how much of an eye for detail is involved. And I watch this segment now, and although as a filmmaker I can appreciate the care and attention that's gone into this, albeit disturbing, recreation of a Bible account of genocide, I still find it interesting. I can find that sort of thing interesting, the use of green screen, the costumes, all that kind of thing. But it's nothing extraordinary. And if you are a Jehovah's Witness watching this, I would compare this with some of the behind-the-scenes documentaries that are made for Hollywood films. And as many of you know, I am a Star Wars fan. One of the things I've really enjoyed about the latest trilogy of Star Wars films is buying them on Apple. I'm not plugging buying films on Apple, by the way. This video is not sponsored by Apple or Star Wars or Lucasfilm. But I've enjoyed buying the films on Apple because they come with behind-the-scenes documentaries, and I find those almost as fascinating as watching the film again. I love seeing how they're made. I love seeing the props. I love seeing them doing the choreography. I love seeing the teamwork, the camaraderie. All of that stuff is fascinating and frankly blows what we've just seen out of the water when you look at it at Hollywood level. I feel like I've seen a glimpse of that when I participated in the Leah Rimini Aftermath special. You just see this incredible teamwork, people who are incredibly talented, all working together seamlessly to produce something meaningful and visually impressive. It's done all the time. The only difference is that when it's done in Hollywood, people get paid.
For the closing festival scene, which required 14,000 Israelites and many sheep, 3D models were made and duplicated to simulate the large crowd. In July 2018, the production packed up and moved to an outdoor location at Watchtower Farms in Walk Hill, New York.
And action!
In August, the last scene was filmed back at the Mount Ebo studio. After 45 days of filming and with over 4 terabytes of footage captured, the team had finished production. The work on the story of Josiah, Love Jehovah, Hate What Is Bad, was done to strengthen Jehovah's people worldwide.
You're not alone. Jehovah is with you.
This powerful story also assists parents as they teach their children the power of God's word and promise. These words that I am commanding you today must be on your heart, and you must inculcate them in your sons and speak of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk on the road, and when you lie down, and when you get up.
So that it may always go well with you and your sons after you, because you are doing what is good and right in the eyes of Jehovah your God.
The story of Josiah has proven to be yet another example of how Jehovah continues to provide abundant spiritual food and support for his people worldwide.
That video certainly brought the Bible account to life for us.
What it did was bring to life a Bible account in which people were literally being hunted down and slaughtered for not having the right religious beliefs. And you can understand why Stephen Lett and his colleagues were salivating at the idea of depicting that particular story. Again, as far as this segment's concerned, I'm always fascinated to see the way things are made, even if they are things that I find grotesque. And the Josiah drama, make no mistake, was grotesque. It was entirely inappropriate, particularly for a convention audience with children in it, which we'll come to. But I'm always fascinated to see the way things are made. It's perhaps no surprise that they filmed the outdoor scenes at the Watchtower facilities in upstate New York. I would have been a bit impressed if they'd traveled to a location in the Middle East and shot it there just to make it more authentic. It's no real surprise that they took the easy route and just did it essentially in their backyard. But what was the point of all this? I mean, again, when you watch the behind-the-scenes documentaries that are made about Hollywood films, what you see is things being done on a far more awe-inspiring scale. But the purpose is not to manipulate people. You could argue that the purpose is to make money, but I would hazard a guess that what drives many creative people, if not the majority of creative people, is not just making a living, putting bread on the table, but entertaining people. I very much doubt that when they're putting together Hollywood blockbuster films, it's purely about money. There is at least some level at which the crew, the director, the cast are trying to craft something that will uplift, will entertain, will inspire. What's the motivation here? Well, the motive, as we saw explained, is to indoctrinate children. The narrator says, this powerful story of apostates being literally hunted down and killed assists parents as they teach their children the power of God's word and promise. It was aimed at children. You are expected to go to all 3 days of the convention and bring your kids with you if you have kids. It's not an optional thing. You don't get to say, oh, by the way, I'll watch the videos, but I'll decide later on whether my children watch the videos or not. No, the children watch the videos with you. It's kind of what the videos have been made for, as we heard there, primarily to indoctrinate the kids. And interestingly, it seems that at least some Jehovah's Witness parents have been pushing back on this.
We might mention that we've had just a few parents write in expressing concern that some of our videos depict scenes that could have an effect on children who've been protected from anything even hinting at an act of violence. We very much appreciate the concern. However, when portraying a Bible account, we cannot ignore the message Jehovah saw fit to preserve in His Word. We don't feel comfortable watering down the inspired insight that Jehovah has preserved for the benefit of true worshipers. However, as you've observed, we do so as tastefully as possible. We don't show actual violent acts or bloodshed.
Oh, as long as we don't show violent acts or bloodshed, it's all fine. We get to show, and this, for me, I was watching this, and there's more, by the way. I was watching this with my jaw on the floor. First of all, that there are Jehovah's Witness parents who feel confident enough to write into the organization, and in sufficient numbers for this to be something where the governing body has said, well, we need to address this in a JW broadcasting episode. I find that fascinating all by itself. But equally fascinating is the fact that Stephen Lett answers this perfectly valid observation that these dramas are not age appropriate. They are depicting scenes in which, in the case of the Josiah drama, again, people are running for their lives, being pursued by people with swords. That is a very graphic depiction with a very clear message and a very clear application for the children watching it. So you can understand Jehovah's Witness parents being appalled because they will see it as their job to shield their children from anything that would alarm them or would disturb them or wouldn't be appropriate for their age group. And Stephen Lett's answer is, however, you're all wrong, quite frankly, parents. Speaking as someone who's never been a parent, I'm here to tell you that we're not going to water down the Bible. Well, that's nonsense. Straight off, I can tell you that Jehovah's Witnesses are all about watering down the Bible. They did, for example, a drama that was based on the story of Lot's wife. I think it was for the 2017 Don't Give Up convention. You don't see in there a scene in which the girls seduce the father. That would be holding true to the Bible narrative, because that's what happens in the story. Not only does Lot's wife turn to salt, but after she turns to salt, the two girls get their father drunk and have children with him. So why, if Stephen Lett and the governing body are so keen on not watering down the Bible, why aren't they showing scenes like that? Frankly, Jehovah's Witnesses, I don't want to get drawn into a whole theological discussion, but Jehovah's Witnesses are all about watering down the Bible. They are all about skimming over. I mean, even before you got that scene in the story of Lot's wife, you had the story of the angels coming to Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot offering his children to the people of the city, offering his daughters, so that the angels wouldn't get violated. How was that depicted in the drama? But even in other areas of general Jehovah's Witness theology, they are all about watering down the verses. If you research the account of Jephthah's daughter, for example, and you compare the way the verse is rendered between the New World Translation and all the other Bibles, it very quickly becomes clear that Jephthah burned his daughter in the fire as an actual sacrifice. But Jehovah's Witnesses water down that whole story and say, no. We can't have the Bible contradicting itself, because Jehovah would never do that. Jehovah would never allow one of his servants to offer up their children as a human sacrifice. Therefore, what we're going to do is we're going to invent this whole new narrative where Jephthah's daughter instead becomes a nun, and the daughters of Israel go and pay their respects to Jephthah's daughter every year or so as a tribute. They totally watered that story down. They very rarely in these dramas show any of the truly nasty stuff involving sex much of the time. They pick and choose the narratives that suit the governing body's agenda, which is to impress people with their power and their authority. And when all of this is done on such an arbitrary basis, with control and manipulation in mind, Stephen Lett has no room whatsoever to talk about watering down the Bible and keeping things real. Because it's not about that at all. It's purely about his power and the governing body's power, and cherry-picking which Bible verses they want to depict in order to achieve their agenda.
A scriptural precedent might be found in 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 13. Jehoshaphat was describing a great crowd of enemy nations that were about to launch an attack against God's people. He described the possible disaster quite graphically, referring to the possibility of death by the sword, by pestilence, or by famine. Who was he sharing this disturbing information with? 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 13 tells us, "Meanwhile, all those of Judah were standing before Jehovah along with their little ones, their wives, and their children." Jehovah wanted all, including the young ones, to understand what was coming. Parents likewise need to give their children a realistic idea of what we all will face in the near future. Many parents choose to help their children appreciate the graphic visual imagery of a Bible-based video, while at the same time building trust in Jehovah, who will be with them in times of distress. This is similar to what they do when reading a graphic biblical account to their children from the Scriptures, such as from the book of Revelation. Be assured that we'll continue to be sensitive to the feelings of you parents when we produce a video that's based on a Bible account that includes descriptions of warfare or other incidents of violent actions. We'll do so with care, while not ignoring the powerful details depicted in the inspired Word of God.
So the message here is, we take note, parents, that many of you are alarmed by the scenes of violence that we are insisting not just you watch, but your children watch as well. You don't get a choice, after all, in whether you attend the convention and watch these videos. It's something you're expected to do, and you're also expected to show these videos to your children. In fact, as we learned in the previous segment, the Josiah drama was intended for children, was intended as a teaching tool for children. But Stephen Lett's message seems to be, we take on board your observation, but quite frankly, you're wrong, and we're right. We've decided that your children need to see scenes of violence to get the message across. How does he put it? Parents, likewise, need to give their children a realistic idea of what we will all face in the near future.
Parents likewise need to give their children a realistic idea of what we all will face in the near future.
I would just ask you to compare what Toni Morris has said.
I've seen what happens to humans when they're mangled. You see it on TV and some of that. Well, till you smell human flesh burning from a helicopter crash. People that look like humans, like a hot dog on a grill, blackened and splitting open. I know what's coming at Armageddon. A lot of dead people. A lot of dead people.
So what we've just heard is apparently a realistic idea of what we will all face in the near future. So when can we expect the video depicting that, Stephen? When can we expect the video depicting charred human remains in the aftermath of Armageddon? After all, it's important that parents give their children a realistic idea of what we will all face in the near future. Where do you draw the line? Who gets to decide where the line is drawn? And would I be right in suggesting that the ones who are currently making that decision are mostly non-parents? Mostly people who have no experience whatsoever in child development or anything like that. But I would just ask Jehovah's Witnesses to look up the scripture that Stephen Lett quotes as a scriptural reason for showing violent propaganda videos to children. If you read the full verse, it's here in 2 Chronicles chapter 20. If you read from verse 5, then Jehoshaphat stood up in the congregation of Judah and Jerusalem in the house of Jehovah before the new courtyard, and he said, O Jehovah, the God of our forefathers, are you not God in the heavens? Do you not have dominion over all the kingdoms of the nations? In your hand are power and might, and no one can stand against you. O our God, did you not drive away the inhabitants of this land from before your people Israel, and then give it as a lasting possession to the offspring of your friend Abraham? And they settled in it, and they built for you there a sanctuary for your name, saying, if disaster should come on us, whether by sword, adverse judgment, pestilence, or famine, let us stand before this house and before you, for your name is in this house, and call to you for help out of our distress, and may you hear and save us. Hopefully it's immediately obvious how disingenuous Stephen Lett has been here. This verse, first of all, isn't describing going out and chasing people with swords and hacking people down in cold blood for not having the same religious beliefs. This is literally saying, what are we going to do if disaster should come on us? Whether by sword, adverse judgment, pestilence, or famine, what are we going to do if people come at us with swords, or if we suffer by adverse judgment, pestilence, or famine? Stephen Lett is literally taking these words, twisting them round, and suggesting that because these words were said in front of children, that makes it okay to produce high-quality HD depictions of people being chased with swords and hunted down and killed for the crime of having the wrong religion. I ask you, viewers, is that what we've just read?
He described the possible disaster quite graphically, referring to the possibility of death by the sword, by pestilence, or by famine. Jehovah wanted all, including the young ones, to understand what was coming.
And how shady that he shouldn't read the whole verse. He's literally just said, oh, trust me, it says this. But when you actually look up the verse, it's just not what it's describing. And quite clearly, you are never going to find a verse, a Bible verse, that deals with what to show on video dramatizations. Self-evidently, the Bible is going to be silent on that. Because it's one thing to talk about violence, it's one thing to mention swords, it's another thing entirely to graphically depict it, not just in illustrations, the type of which we have in the My Book of Bible Stories, or the My Book of Bible Horrors or Nightmares. It's another thing entirely to depict scenes of violence in a HD video, where you see people that you can believe in reacting, running, being scared. It adds a whole new dimension to things. And Stephen Lett is seriously asking parents to believe that the governing body knows better. The governing body knows best. We have one governing body member who has kids, therefore we're an authority on child development, and we get to decide what's appropriate, what's age appropriate for children.
The theme for this program is be childlike, but not childish. 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 20 is our theme scripture. Brothers, Do not become young children in your understanding, but be young children as to badness, and become full grown in your understanding. In this single verse, we're told not to be like a young child in one way, and we're told to be like a young child in another way. We should not be like a child when it comes to understanding, and we should be like a child when it comes to badness.
So now we're down to the nitty-gritty of what Stephen Lett wants to talk about. And what's on his mind is the need for Jehovah's Witnesses to be childlike, but not childish. I think straight away we're indulging in word games, aren't we? Because arguably childlike and childish both mean exactly the same thing. But the message here is that Watchtower gets to decide in what ways it's positive for witnesses to be childlike and in what ways it's negative. I just find this inevitable, quite frankly, because we've seen it, or we do see it in every JW Broadcasting episode, witnesses being infantilized by being patronized and talked down to as though they're children, with this very basic, mind-numbing, elementary level of dialogue in episode after episode, to the point where rudimentary words that everyone knows the meaning of are being explained to the viewer. I guess it's inevitable, isn't it, that we'd have this episode where what's been implied already, you could say for years, is finally being laid out on the table. Look, we want you to be kids, because kids are so much easier to control.
How do we spend our free time? Do we squander voluminous hours watching television or reading material that provides little or no spiritual nutrition? Or do we make wise use of our free time to take in solid spiritual food? When we receive a new issue of the Watchtower, do we merely scan through it, looking at a few highlights, and then do something else? Do we take time to research deeper spiritual truths so as to fully understand them? Do we take time to really meditate? Meditation is not daydreaming. Meditation is bridal, focused thought. Pause your reading to ask questions such as, what does this teach me about Jehovah? With whom could I share this information? What's Jehovah telling me? How does this fit in with other things I know about this subject? How can I make application? Simply reading through the Bible could be likened to walking quickly through the world's greatest museum and periodically glancing at the various displays. You'll learn something. But meditatively peering into God's Word can be likened to stopping all along the museum route and even stooping down and closely examining from different angles the artifacts, exhibitions, and displays. Now, our knowledge and appreciation are going to be enhanced much more. Yes, our spiritual appetite and feeding habits reveal much about whether we have done away with the trait of a young child, namely, immature feeding habits.
I was quite triggered by what Stephen Lett was saying there about use of time. Are we using our time wisely to feed spiritually from the bounteous spiritual food that's available? It was reminding me of when I was a teenager, and obviously I was a very devout Jehovah's Witness as a teenager and grew up in a very devout Jehovah's Witness family. So it was kind of difficult to latch on to things outside of the Jehovah's Witness world that I could take an interest in that weren't somehow forbidden in some way. For example, I wasn't allowed to watch Ghostbusters or anything like that. So I was always kind of limited, and I latched onto football around the age of 14. I latched onto football as something I could get into because there was nothing supposedly wrong about football. Of course, in recent years, there's been multiple segments on JW Broadcasting warning about the perils of getting involved with football. But I latched on to Manchester United, my local team, and at one point I was buying the club's magazine every month. So as soon as the issue came out, I would buy the magazine and I would be reading every page because I found it fascinating. And I remember my mum saying to me once, "Lloyd, you know, your dad saw you when he came home from work reading the Manchester United magazine. And he said, I would really have liked it if I came home from work and Lloyd was reading The Watchtower. That would really have made me happy." And this kind of shaming and guilt tripping, although I'm sure my mum had only the best of intentions in saying that, it had a big impact on me, because what on earth was I doing wrong? You know? I was being shamed for not filling my head with cult indoctrination, which is what Stephen Lett is ordering witnesses to do here. He's saying, fill your minds with what we have to say. Our organization is a font of spiritual wisdom. And unless you're not just reading it, but meditating on it, you're being childish. You're just a child. You're immature. Who do you think you are? Unless you can elevate yourself to our level of spiritual enlightenment by filling your minds with this nonsense at every available opportunity. That's what this is about, and it infuriates me. What really is meditation? As far as Jehovah's Witnesses are concerned, meditation is just overthinking stuff that shouldn't really be given more than a passing glance. He talks about the museum, and I actually found it very ironic that when he was talking about the analogy of the museum, it shows a still there of the Elgin marbles. What a perfect analogy. Because the Elgin marbles, you can actually go and see them in the British Museum. Those are stolen artifacts. They were stolen by Lord Elgin at the beginning of the 19th century. He claimed he had a royal decree from the Ottoman Empire, which has never surfaced. And he brought them to London, and they've been on display in the British Museum ever since. But they're stolen artifacts. They belong in Athens at the Parthenon, where they were taken from. So it's ironic that they've shown the Elgin marbles in this frame, because you could argue that the Bible itself is full of either stolen or borrowed artifacts from other wisdom of the time, other stories, other fables, other legends are kind of merged together in what you read in the Bible. So I found that quite an interesting little Freudian slip there in the analogy. But what you have again is Stephen Lett manipulating people, deceiving them into thinking that what he has to share, what his organization has to share, is priceless. It's the sort of thing that you should expect to see in a museum. That's how priceless it is. It isn't. It's cult propaganda. You shouldn't be walking through this museum at a fast pace. You should be legging it to get to the exit as quickly as possible.
So we should no longer be children, tossed about as by waves, and carried here and there by every wind of teaching, by means of the trickery of men, by means of cunning and deceptive schemes. So what's the negative trait? Young children are easily tricked or fooled. This scripture likens being easily tricked about what's right or wrong to being tossed about by the waves of the ocean and blown around by the wind. If you think of a piece of wood floating in a turbulent ocean or a piece of paper in a windstorm, there's no stability or direction. Both can be easily maneuvered to go anywhere. Take any position. Well, that's true of very young children who often can be easily deceived. For example, if given a choice between a shiny coin of little value and paper money of great value, the shiny coin will likely be chosen. But now here's the point. What do our spiritual choices reveal about us? Do our choices in regard to music and other entertainment, clothing, and grooming indicate that we're being fooled even slightly by Satan and his world? Yes, Satan is bent on tricking us. But Jehovah tells us in 1 Corinthians 14:20, the scripture we read earlier, do not become young children in your understanding.
I shouldn't get so livid when Stephen Lett talks about children as though he is the world's #1 authority on child psychology. Even though he doesn't have children, the only governing body member with children is Anthony Morris, and boy does he milk it. And don't get me wrong, I get that you can have something to say about children without being a parent. I'm not saying that you don't get an opinion on what children do, say, or think unless you've got children yourself. It's just that if you are going to volunteer opinions, particularly when it comes to child psychology, it helps if you can be doing so without an ulterior motive. And what he's doing here is he's talking about child psychology and what goes on in the mind of a child from the perspective of a cult leader who wants to manipulate people, including children, and he's getting it wrong because he's not a parent and he doesn't know the first thing about children. In fact, if anything, if you listen to what he says about children whenever he's talking about young ones, it's quite obvious that he has a disdain for children until they reach the point where they start serving him. I disagree with his poorly thought out analogy that children will always go for the shiny coin. Not necessarily. All children are different. If you were to line up 10 children and do that exercise, what do you want? Do you want the shiny coin or do you want the note? Some will choose, I bet you, some will choose the shiny coin and others will choose the note. Others will want to see what's on the picture, what's the writing. He doesn't have the first clue what he's talking about. And then we get to the whole easily tricked or fooled thing. Children are easily tricked or fooled.
Young children are easily tricked or fooled.
Well, doesn't that say something about the fact, Stephen Lett, that your organization encourages child baptism so that we get ages as young as 6 or 7 in the literature for baptism? If children can be easily tricked or fooled, what right do you have forcing them, yes, forcing them to get baptized? Because we've had the talk, which I've shown numerous times on this channel, where Tony Morris even encourages parents to bribe their children to withhold their driving license if they're not baptized by the age of 16. When they're talking about driftwood and they're talking about paper in a windstorm,
if you think of a piece of wood floating in a turbulent ocean or a piece of paper in a windstorm, there's no stability or direction. Both can be easily maneuvered to go anywhere.
They're basically saying that when you're in that situation, when you're not grounded emotionally and mentally, you are more susceptible to influence and coercion. You're childlike. You're naive. It's easy to fool you. Well, isn't that exactly what the organization encourages when it comes to its advice for witnesses to capitalize on death in the preaching work? We have had videos from this organization literally encouraging witnesses to exploit situations where they encounter people in the ministry who have lost someone in death.
Wow, Dad. He was really angry.
He was, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Well, I always try to remember that for years I used to react exactly the same way.
Really?
Yeah. As you know, I learned the truth in my 20s.
Yeah?
Growing up in a violent family, it also made me violent.
I'm not interested. Go away and don't come back.
Wow. So what changed then?
Well, you see, one of my good friends died, and that very same weekend, the witnesses came round. Now, normally I'd yell at them, but this time I listened. And that's the beauty of the truth. Anyone can change. And that is one reason why we continue preaching.
Just because someone's nasty with us today doesn't mean we should give up on them, because who knows what might happen. Someone might die. And then when we call back, they'll listen. Then when we call back, they'll be pliable. They'll be easier to manipulate. This sort of emotional manipulation is brazen in the organization's literature. And yet when it suits Watchtower, they have the gall to tell witnesses, oh, you don't want to be too easily manipulated. Once we've managed to manipulate you, once we've got you, once we've managed to fill your head with this nonsense, no one else gets to influence you. So it would be childlike of you to let anyone else tell you anything that contradicts what we've managed to trick you into believing. It is utter hypocrisy.
With whom will I compare this generation? It is like young children sitting in the marketplaces who call out to their playmates, saying, "We played the flute for you, but you did not dance. We wailed, but you did not beat yourselves in grief." Jesus was saying that adult people were acting like children. Children love to play. So the negative trait of young children is that they prefer play over responsibility. Think about it. The vast majority of the waking hours of a small child are spent playing. Play, play, and more play. Most of their life is fun and games. But later, when the child goes to school, where does he get the time to do so? He has to take it from his playtime. But now, spiritually speaking, we can ask ourselves, how far have we progressed in buying out time from our playtime? Ephesians 5:16 encourages us to make the best use of our time. Literally, according to the footnote, this scripture is telling us to buy out the appointed time. That is, buy it from less important things. So the question for all of us is, have we bought out the majority of our playtime for more important spiritual responsibilities?
More infuriating pseudo-child psychology from a man who doesn't know the first thing about children, doesn't have kids of his own, and apparently can't stand children, because whenever he's talking about them, outside the context of children following him, it's apparent that he has very little affection for them, finds them quite irritating, it seems, and has a very warped view of who they are as people. He's repeatedly complained on camera that he thinks that children are selfish and greedy.
Children are not born with the godly quality of love. In fact, because of imperfection, they're born with the opposite. Often a tendency to be selfish. They grab things, mine, mine, mine. This tendency toward greed becomes manifest very early. For example, as we see little toddlers grab things and hold them tightly. Mine, mine, mine.
That's what he thinks children are like. And now he's complaining that they play too much.
So the negative trait of young children is that they prefer play over responsibility. Play, play, and more play.
How dare you not be undertaking household chores from the moment your parents return you from the hospital? Honestly, what's going on in that brain of his? He clearly doesn't grasp that play is essential to child development. It's not a vice. It's not something that's a negative trait. It's part of human development. Children learn to think. Children learn to interact with their surroundings through play. If you got rid of play, you would end up with a very messed up human being. It's all again about manipulation. If you are spending your time doing anything that doesn't benefit Watchtower in some way, then you're a child. Then you're being childlike. Shame on you. If you're not reading our propaganda or trying to push it on other people, you're childlike and you need to get a grip.
Now we've discussed 3 negative traits of a young child that we want to avoid. If we had time, we could have discussed other negative traits to be avoided, such as children tend to have a short attention span. They're easily distracted. Their curiosity often gets them into trouble. And they generally need a lot of time and attention. They're high maintenance. But now, let's briefly discuss 3 positive traits of a young child that we do well to imitate.
Actually, Stephen, let's not do that just yet. Let's first dwell on the utter nonsense that has just been disgorged from your rubbery face. You really, really don't like children for someone who talks about young ones all the time and apparently gets off on the idea of being followed by an entire generation of young ones. What was all that about? Oh, there's a few more. Don't get me started on this, viewers. There's a few more negative traits of young ones that if we had time, we would go down the rabbit hole with all of the terrible, terrible things that young ones do. They're curious. It's a negative trait.
Their curiosity often gets them into trouble.
And we had that, didn't we, in the video that I've just posted about how Jehovah's Witnesses should control their curiosity. This was William Malenfant speaking in a morning worship. Control your curiosity, brothers. We don't want you overthinking the whole mess concerning the 2-tier Christianity, the anointed and the great crowd. Don't overthink it. Don't overthink the fact that the anointed could be mentally imbalanced when they're partaking of the emblems, unless it's the governing body, whose anointing cannot be questioned, is absolutely the real deal, never to be doubted in any way. So we're already seeing this very month an example of the extremely cultish manipulation from the organization when it comes to something as simple as curiosity. Don't be like children. Don't be curious. No, actually, any children watching this, and I hope there aren't, quite frankly, because this is messed up. This video is not for children to watch. Curiosity is a wonderful thing in children. Children should always, without any shame, be curious. It would be negative if children weren't curious, because if you have a child lacking in curiosity, you have a child that will never learn anything. So that's one negative trait, apparently, that children have curiosity. Another negative trait, apparently, is that children need time and attention. They're high maintenance.
And they generally need a lot of time and attention. They're high maintenance.
Now children are supposed to feel bad because they need to be taken care of. I kid you not. This is supposed to be a negative thing, that children need to be looked after. Well, actually, that makes perfect sense from an organization that fails in its rudimentary responsibilities when it comes to child safeguarding. But seriously, what are children supposed to do? Make their own meals? Go to work? In Stephen Lett's tiny, tiny mind, it seems that the perfect child is a child who isn't curious, doesn't ask any questions, isn't interested in playing. Children also apparently need to be independent. How dare you, children, need to be looked after? What you're doing, actually, by being high maintenance, is robbing time and attention that should be spent on Stephen. That should be spent on Stephen and his pals and the organisation that they run. That's the only place, apparently, that should be getting time and attention. Those are the only people, apparently. Not children. Stephen Lett needs your time and attention.
Young children are innocent, inexperienced when it comes to badness. Or put another way, they haven't done many truly bad things. Like children, we don't want to gain knowledge or experience in what is bad. For example, when it comes to pornography, we want no experience whatsoever in regard to this filthy thing of Satan's world. When it comes to television programs that are designated for a mature audience, remember to tell yourself, I'm not old enough. I'm a young child.
If only children in the Jehovah's Witness religion were all innocent regarding things that are truly bad. Stephen Lett knows firsthand that that's not true, because as we learned in the Witnesses documentary, he had a letter from a friend that he actually replied to, drawing his attention to the fact that children in his organisation were being robbed of their innocence, and drawing attention to the fact that there are policies that make this possible, that perpetuate the abuse, so that more and more children are robbed of their innocence. He knows about all of this, and yet he can sit in front of the camera and talk about how innocent children are when it comes to true badness. I found that sickening. But again, what's the overall message here? The overall message is we want you to be malleable. We want you to be compliant. We want you to do whatever we tell you to do. We want you to hate whatever we tell you to hate. It's not just about pornography. It's not just about the examples that he's given there. Watchtower wants to micromanage people's lives. We see this in episode after episode. And Stephen Lett is here saying, unless you fall in line, you're not being childlike enough in a good way.
So calling a young child to him, he, Jesus, stood him in their midst and said, Truly I say to you, unless you turn around and become as young children, you will by no means enter into the kingdom of the heavens. Therefore, whoever will humble himself like this young child is the one who is the greatest in the kingdom of the heavens. What's the desirable trait? Young children are humble and teachable. Young children ask many questions because they want to learn. But grown-ups are often hesitant to ask questions. Why? They don't want to look uninformed. But acting like we know something when we don't is actually dishonest and probably motivated by pride. The point is, don't be afraid to reveal what you don't know. Remain humble and teachable like a child.
Did he really say that acting like we know something when we don't is dishonest and a sign of pride? Isn't that entirely what the governing body does? Isn't that what he does? Any religious leader who repeatedly espouses teachings that he or she cannot possibly prove with the aim of encouraging people to follow them is speaking about things that they cannot know. And then they turn around and say, oh, it's all about faith. Believe what I'm telling you, even though I can't prove it to you. And don't worry about evidence, just take it on faith. That's what he routinely does. He is literally describing himself at this point. And notice how he's now describing the humility of children as a desirable quality. All witnesses need to be childlike by being humble, by just swallowing hook, line and sinker anything that Stephen Lett and his colleagues tell them. But what he's actually doing is contradicting what he said just a few moments ago, because when he was reeling off the negative traits of children, he listed curiosity. Curiosity gets children in trouble.
Their curiosity often gets them into trouble.
Well, now he's describing the curiosity of children in a positive light.
Young children ask many questions because they want to learn.
That's curiosity. That is curiosity. So how can he one moment say that the curiosity of children is a bad thing, and then the very next moment list that exact same characteristic and say this is something that we all need to imitate? The man does not have a clue what he's talking about.
When the chief priest and the scribes saw the marvelous things he did, and the boys who were shouting in the temple, "Save, we pray, the Son of David," they became indignant and said to him, "Do you hear what these are saying?" Jesus said to them, "Yes. Did you never read this? Out of the mouth of children and infants you have brought forth praise." So what desirable characteristic can we identify? Young children are exuberant and enthusiastic. Well, in like manner, we want to remain exuberant and expressive about Jehovah, Jesus, the kingdom, and other spiritual things. Psalm 145:7 encourages us to bubble over and shout joyfully because of these wonderful things. And we never want to lose that childlike enthusiasm. Well, there we have 3 desirable traits of a young child that we want to do our utmost to imitate. If we had time, we could discuss several other positive characteristics, such as children tend to be trusting, not prejudiced, and not hypocritical.
So Stephen apparently likes the idea of children being trusting. Well, I'm sure he would, wouldn't he? You can understand why someone in his position, who actively tries to recruit children into his organization on a routine basis at this point, you can understand why he would like the fact that children are trusting. This, for me, was just another insight into how basically naive the organization wants witnesses to be. They want witnesses to be exuberant and enthusiastic about the truth. Surely enthusiasm and exuberance is something that should just come to you. It's not something that you can just order someone. Please be more enthusiastic. Please be more exuberant. It's like with this year's convention theme, always rejoice. And we had this as well in, I think it was one of the most recent JW Broadcasting episodes by a governing body helper, where the overall message seemed to be, you've got to enjoy this. It's not enough to just follow along with what's expected of you. You've got to do it happily. You've got to appreciate what we're telling you to do. You've got to show some excitement about it. Again, how can you order people along these lines? If people get excited about something, great. If people get exuberant about something, great. But it's not something that you can order people to do.
But now, in review, may each of us prayerfully strive not to be childish when it comes to, number 1, immature feeding habits. Number 2, being easily tricked or fooled. And number 3, preferring play over responsibility. On the other hand, may each of us prayerfully strive to be childlike when it comes to being, number 1, innocent and inexperienced concerning badness. Number 2, humble and teachable. And number 3, exuberant and enthusiastic about spiritual things.
I can still remember when the very first JW Broadcasting episode came out, and that too was hosted by Stephen Lett. And I said at the time, this is a problematic move for Watchtower. It's one thing for them to write ludicrous material that we can point to, future generations can point to as evidence that this is a man-made organization. It's another thing entirely for the leaders to be getting on camera and saying in highly produced HD videos things that are demonstrably ludicrous or demonstrably manipulative. And here we have a governing body member who has just devoted an entire sermon to telling his followers to be like children, to be trusting, to be gullible, to swallow everything hook, line and sinker, to read propaganda material rather than, quote, playing, rather than doing anything that doesn't benefit the organization. How much more manipulative can you get? This is a man who is himself very childlike, at least as far as I can tell from the way he speaks and his apparent ignorance in so many areas of life. And he wants to bring everyone down to his level, but in a way that benefits him. He wants everyone to view things in his overly simplistic, black and white way of looking at the world. I wish it was easy for Jehovah's Witnesses to see what's happening here. The depressing thing is, I'm not sure it's so simple. I think that millions of Jehovah's Witnesses watching this will just go along with what he's saying. And what's most chilling for me is that I think this will make many Jehovah's Witness parents worse parents. Because I think a lot of Stephen Lett's ignorance regarding children and regarding child psychology and regarding the developmental needs of children will rub off on parents, because they will look at him as being an authority figure. They will look at him as being someone who is wise and who is conveying God's wisdom. And although I think lots of Jehovah's Witness parents will be smart enough to give a wide berth to a lot of what Stephen Lett has been saying here, I think that if you're a Jehovah's Witness parent who's not a very good parent, and you're hearing him saying stuff like play is bad, curiosity is bad, children are high maintenance, they require too much time and attention from their parents, if you're already sort of minded in that direction, and you have someone like Stephen Lett validating your ignorant ideas, it's going to make you an even worse parent. So I think that what Stephen Lett has been coming out with in this sermon is not just damaging and dangerous from an overall coercive point of view. I think he is going to make an entire generation of terrible Jehovah's Witness parents even worse.
The Bible contains many accounts of faithful men and women. We can learn from their examples. In the following dramatization, notice what a family learns from Samuel.
Samuel was only my age when Jehovah spoke to him. He respected Eli, but he had to stand up for what's right. I never thought that I'd have to do something similar. I love my brother, and I always wanted to be like him. But those pictures of him partying with kids from school showed he was living a double life. I didn't want to get him in trouble. But I knew I had to say something.
We're now at the stage where they're making highly coercive dramatizations, again aimed at children, depicting children made for children, which are encouraging children to essentially spy on their older siblings. That's the stage we're at. So that if a boy finds his older brother's phone, first of all, how is it okay to just be snooping around on someone else's phone? That's not addressed. But oh no, my older brother has been at a party. That's apparently what all this is about. He's been partying with non-Jehovah's Witness friends and living a double life. In other words, doing any of the vast number of things that the organization frowns on, which, as we know, includes such things as pursuing higher education, watching the wrong kinds of films, or wearing the wrong kinds of trousers. There's no end to the ways in which this organization micromanages people. And if someone steps outside these boundaries, well, it's perfectly okay for their sibling to snoop around on their phone, find the shocking footage of them enjoying themselves outside of the Jehovah's Witness bubble, and what they're then required to do is report on them, either to the parents or, as we're going to see, to the elders. I ask you, I mean, if you're watching this again as someone who's never been a Jehovah's Witness, you're just interested, what's this religion all about? Hopefully you're watching this thinking, oh, yes, I'm afraid it's really that controlling.
I told him he had to tell Mom and Dad. He warned me not to tell. But Samuel was courageous and did not hide anything. and Jehovah himself was with him. I couldn't hide this. Talking to my parents wasn't easy. But I knew it was the right thing to do.
Of course we were proud of Danny, but
at the time we were a little distracted.
maybe somehow it was all just a misunderstanding. We needed to know what was going on.
We just wanted to help him.
What on earth have we just been watching? I mean, let's just be clear, because the way the parents react, it's as though there's footage of a kitten being tortured, or their son violently assaulting someone, or committing some kind of heinous crime. Let's remind ourselves what this is all about. He went to a party with his school friends, and he was living a double life. And yet they're acting as though their child is a total monster. Like, what on earth? We don't even know you anymore. I ask you, is this not completely over the top? But this is how Watchtower wants parents to react. This is how Watchtower wants children to react. Once they've done what Watchtower wants them to do, which is spy, commit espionage on their siblings, if they uncover anything that doesn't fit the Watchtower mold in terms of behaviour, in terms of everyone being whiter than white, they are to not just report on their sibling, but it's to be treated as though the worst atrocity has been committed. That's what we're seeing here. And as well, did you notice the way that this older brother was stereotyped? He was shown shoving his younger brother, in other words, behaving or reacting in a violent way. So apparently, if you're leading a double life, if you are existing outside of the Jehovah's Witness sphere of influence or doing anything that the governing body disapproves of course you're going to be violent. So that's the kind of message there, the hidden message that we see. Also notice how this deviant brother's bedroom has posters on the wall that are to do with football. Again, I just don't understand, as someone for whom football was one of those rare things in my childhood that wasn't JW related, but which was perfectly innocent and gave me enjoyment outside of the Jehovah's Witness culture and religion, I just cannot get my head around this overt war that's being waged by the organisation in video after video against a sport. And as far as I can tell, I mean, I don't want to repeat myself too much because it's coming up now in multiple JW broadcasting episodes. As far as I can tell, it's purely about competition. It's purely about the organisation wanting a monopoly on what gives people enjoyment and pleasure. And when you have a sport like football that can be so engrossing and that can, frankly, just give people so much enjoyment, in many cases an automatic kind of community because you're part of a team, I can understand why Watchtower would be terrified of that. I just can't stand the way they are stigmatizing something so innocent and connecting it with behavior that is itself innocent, but which is being portrayed as just the worst thing in the world, tantamount to committing some kind of heinous crime. Again, we're just talking about someone going to a party and leading a double life.
We couldn't help but blame ourselves for what was happening. Then we thought back to Samuel's example.
Samuel, you need to listen to us.
You're getting old, Samuel. And your sons are not like you.
They cheat and they take bribes.
They bend Jehovah's rules any way they please.
Even faithful Samuel had sons who deviated from Jehovah's standards.
We wanted to help our son. Just as Samuel didn't alter his course, and Jehovah stood by him, we knew if we did things his way, he'd stand by us.
Did you see the loyalty the younger son showed by his bringing the matter to the attention of his parents? Did you also notice the loyalty the parents showed by going to the elders for assistance? After the parents were able to talk to the elders, we hope that the older son was able to get the help he needed and that the discipline brought him to his senses. Has your child left Jehovah? Do you blame yourself? If so, remember that Jehovah stood by faithful Samuel, and he'll stand by you. He'll help you endure.
He'll help you endure. He'll stand by you. He'll support you so long as you don't let Jehovah down by refusing to shun your deviant child, your child who has strayed from the organization. That's what this is about. Right from the beginning, I could see where this was going. This is all about reinforcing the shunning policy. This is about demonizing even children, even minors who deviate in any way, who lead a double life, making them appear as monsters, as though they've been running down grannies or torturing pets or goodness knows what. I mean, look at the contempt with which the parents look at their son when he enters the room. Those eyes are devoid of all love and affection. And at this point, he hasn't even been disfellowshipped. This is before, apparently, they go to the elders. But they are to view their son as not quite human, as not worthy of their parental love, because he has done something that the organization disapproves of. Their loyalty to the organization is paramount, so of course they're just going to go running straight to the elders. The strong implication is that this kid ends up getting disfellowshipped. He receives the needed assistance from the elders, and let's hope he responds to the discipline that's given by the organization, which, as we all know, amounts to emotional blackmail, because all shunning does is says, regardless of whether you think it's true or not, regardless of what your beliefs are, regardless of what your relationship with Jehovah is, if you want to see your family again, you'll do X, Y, Z. That's what the whole shunning arrangement is about. It's about control, it's about coercion, it's about manipulation, and you see all of that in this horrendous segment.
Another challenge we face today is remaining united in a deeply divided world. During the 1950s and 1960s, racial tensions in the United States greatly intensified. How were Jehovah's people affected during that period? And how do they maintain unity? Let's look for the answers to those questions in the following report.
My mother always said Jehovah did not intend for all of us to look alike.
In those early days, we would work every house in the county. Black families, white families, any color.
At school, there was pressure there. Be involved with the racial activity.
We would hear about the problems and the issues. It would be in the news, and you would know what was going on in the South.
Some may wonder, how is it that our people, that is Jehovah's Witnesses, black and white, could maintain such unity when the world around them was falling apart?
I don't think that's the question that this segment is intended to answer. I think this segment has been put together because it's common knowledge that there was segregation in the United States right up to the time of the Civil Rights Movement, with some congregations for black witnesses and some congregations for white witnesses. And the question becomes, how can you have that kind of division in Jehovah's organization? Shouldn't Jehovah's organization be above that sort of thing? And the way they describe it in the captions at the beginning is, oh, well, this was government restrictions. This was all about the government restricting our activities. So what were we to do? The government was telling us to do this, so we had no choice but to do it. But of course, they are quite happy to go against what the government requires when it suits them. So if the government says you're not to preach, they'll still preach. The understanding has always been that if Caesar's law interferes in any way with God's law should come first. That's the way things are with Jehovah's Witnesses. It's one of the problems, you might say, with the handling of child protection, because Watchtower has this view that this is what the Bible says regarding two witnesses, and who are we to go against what the Bible says, even if it leads to a crime being covered up? Well, here you have a completely different narrative. Oh, well, the government wants us all to meet in different congregations depending on skin color. So who are we to stand in the way?
The brothers always were interested in each other. So if there was a black congregation and a white congregation, we had interest and fellow feeling for both.
The rule was we were not to meet together, and we couldn't meet, but we could talk to one another and we could visit one another. So I think there was great support on both sides, black and white brothers, back in those days. If we had a problem getting a facility, for example, they'd have contacts and they could get certain things done. So basically we worked together. The congregation started integrating after certain civil rights laws were passed.
We had a big meeting of all the elders and worked out the territory assignments and whatever else was necessary to have integrated congregations.
Some friends would feel, and maybe rightly so at the time, that there would be some violence if we integrated. There probably was some Kingdom Halls damage and things like that as a result. But the fact is, there was integration going in other places in the schools and things like that, in the universities and colleges. And so it was obvious that if they could do it, then we even more so.
The process of integration was successful because it was under Jehovah's direction.
Both black and white, we had the same thing in common. We loved Jehovah.
We have formed, with Jehovah's help, by means of his Holy Spirit, a worldwide brotherhood. Granted, they have their imperfections, but it is a brotherhood and something to be truly marveled at.
The brothers began to feel what we knew was true. We're all one organization. They began to feel it, they began to experience it.
We loved Jehovah, and we loved our brothers. So there you have it. How could you fail to have unity when Jehovah had drawn you together?
Did you notice what helped our brothers maintain unity during that difficult time?
Yes, the law. Apparently, it was all about restrictions. And as soon as the restrictions are lifted, then, now we can have integration. Now we don't need to have black congregations and white congregations because Caesar is now letting us mingle, so we're going to mingle. Apparently, it was all down to Caesar. It was all down to Satan's system, apparently, to call the shots. It was all down to the civil rights movement, which apparently, you'd have to watch the whole thing, I guess. But there's a very strong message as well that it would have been wrong for witnesses to involve themselves in the civil rights movement. Because, of course, witnesses are supposed to stay neutral to worldly politics. So they weren't to get involved in the civil rights movement, which unquestionably improved society for the better and introduced more equality, not just in America, but you could argue it had a knock-on effect in other parts of the world. They weren't to involve themselves in that, and they were to just toe the line, apparently. Again, when it suits the organization, they have to listen to Caesar, but not so in other areas. For me, viewers, this is just a total rewriting of history. I would be interested if you are watching this and you have first-hand knowledge of, shall we say, the slowness of integration and the prolonging of segregation unnecessarily. I've heard of it, but it's not really an area in which I can speak with a great deal of confidence because I don't have too much knowledge about that. So if you do have personal knowledge, please do leave a comment below, and I would be fascinated to hear what you have to say or read what you have to say on that. What I can tell you is that there is a long and ugly history of racism in Jehovah's organization. I've written about this in my book, The Reluctant Apostate, but I've also, if you want to read it more quickly and more cheaply, there's a blog article that I wrote on the history of racism in Jehovah's Witnesses. So check out the link, which will be in the description, for examples, clear, unequivocal examples of the most appalling racism in Jehovah's organization, both before and after it was supposedly chosen in 1919 to be God's faithful slave. When it comes to segregation, I can't think of a clearer example than what happened during the release of the photodrama of creation in 1914. Jehovah's Witnesses love to go on about the photodrama of creation as an example of them being on the cutting edge of technology, even at the outset of filmmaking. There they were creating this 8-hour epic describing the good news, as it were. But there's an uglier side to the photo drama of creation involving racism, and I describe it in my book. There was an article printed in the April 1st, 1914 Watchtower in response to outrage when witnesses who went to attend the photodrama screening in January 1914 at the Temple, West 63rd Street, New York, found themselves being segregated, with black audience members sent upstairs to the balcony of the auditorium, while white audience members were asked to sit downstairs. So you had segregation. There was no law requiring this. This was just something that was the case when you turned up to watch the photodrama of creation. Oh, you're black, you're sitting upstairs. Oh, you're white, oh, you get to sit downstairs. Understandably, there was uproar. They answered this. I believe Charles Taze Russell answered it in the April 1st, 1914 Watchtower under the heading, "The Colour Line Found Necessary." We might have anticipated that many coloured people would be deeply interested in this drama, but it did not impress itself upon us until gradually their numbers increased to about 25% of the whole audience. Oh, the horror! Of course, we were glad to see them, glad that they were interested in the drama. We had the same feeling respecting them as others, but it was quickly discerned that it was not a case of feeling, but that whereas the coloured people of New York City are about 5% of the population, in our audience they are about 25%, and the number increasing. What shall we do? Let people sit wherever the hell they want would seem to be the obvious answer. As the attendance of the coloured people would increase, proportionately, the number of whites would decrease. For explain it how we will, a majority of whites prefer not to intermingle closely with other races. Yes, we wouldn't want to upset the racists, would we? We want the racists to come to our screening. Recognizing that it meant either the success or the failure of the enterprise of the drama as respects the whites, we have been compelled to assign the coloured friends to the gallery, which, however, is just as good for seeing and hearing as any other part of the temple. Some were offended at this arrangement. Well, can you bloody well blame them? Imagine, just imagine, turning up to that screening as a black man or woman and being herded like cattle into a different section based purely on your skin colour because, oh, we wouldn't want to offend the racists. We want the racists to come to this screening. So if you don't mind, go and sit in a different part of the theatre. And to further drive home how racist the organisation was, look at how the article concluded. They said, if nature favours the coloured brethren and sisters in the exercise of humility, it is that much to their advantage if they are rightly exercised by it. So a clear reference to slavery. Oh, it's in your nature to be humble, so you should just go along with what's happened here, and you shouldn't be too offended, because yours is a humble race. Yours is a servile race, is the message there. So I'm sharing that to provide, hopefully, a counter-narrative to what seems to me to be the clear whitewashing of history. Watchtower saying, yes, there was segregation, but it really wasn't anything to do with us. It's not something we would ever dream of doing ourselves. We just had to go along with what the governments at the time required. And as soon as the opportunity presented itself, we integrated, albeit not quite at the same speed as, let's say, the schools or other institutions. We need a clearer picture of what's happening here when you do the research as a Jehovah's Witness. I mean, I was shocked when I first did the research, and it was appalling to come across numerous examples, so numerous that I felt compelled to write the blog article and include it in my book, The Reluctant Apostate. This is an organization that has a shameful track record on race, and they have no right trying to cover that up.
Impartiality, humility, kindness. These are godly qualities and childlike qualities that our new music video illustrates.
Jesus kindly showed us that we must be as young ones, remembering that in a world of pride, we need a heart just like a child. We value others, seeing what God sees through His impartial eyes. Just like a child, we want to love one another with our eyes, just seeing the good in each other, just like a child. We want to be full of kindness with our eyes, not focused on what could divide us. Be just like a child.
What a beautiful song. We need a childlike heart more than ever.
If you say so, Stephen. Gosh. Yes, so we have, I'm afraid, another cringeworthy music video. I don't have too much to say about the music itself. I think it's nice to kind of shake things up. It certainly makes a change from the very gospel-y tone of some of the music that Watchtower has been pumping out lately. I'll gladly take that Indian style just to kind of shake things up a bit. But if you listen to the lyrics, it's describing an organization, or it's describing an ideology that's entirely removed from what we're used to. We've had in this video reminders to treat people appallingly, reminders to spy on each other, reminders to be paranoid, reminders to report on siblings, reminders to shun, reminders to let ideology come between family ties. And yet here there's a song that says, oh, be like a child, just love each other, just see the good in each other, be full of kindness. That is not the organization that has been described to us in this very episode. It's not the Jehovah's Witness organization I'm familiar with, frankly. So apart from being as cringeworthy as usual, the song is also as hypocritical as usual, I'm afraid.
In many parts of the world, it's customary to judge people on the basis of their race or age or by how much money they have. In our next segment, we'll hear from brothers and sisters who have successfully resisted such influences.
I grew up in a country where people judged you according to the color of your skin. There was black, white, mixed race, but we all kept separate. I needed to learn not to see color, but to see people.
Even though it's such a multicultural area, there is still this prejudice that exists. I've witnessed times where ones from another country, they're often left isolated or are treated in a way that they're not welcome here. If we're not careful, these attitudes could creep into the congregation. We could have isolated groups of cultures that maybe would stick together.
In the area where I grew up, young ones show great respect for older ones. Older ones, however, do not give much importance to young people. This attitude or culture has a major impact on recommendations of young ones as elders in the congregation. We might say, in my opinion, he is too young to be appointed as an elder in the congregation. Recommending a younger brother as an elder in the congregation has been a great blessing to us.
In the article, there was a little phrase that has become a guiding principle for me. Jehovah does not judge our relationship with him by what we possess. So when I meet new brothers and sisters, and for a moment I'm tempted to judge or view them according to those sentiments as to whether they are rich or poor, that principle comes into my mind. My focus therefore shifts to who they really are in terms of their devotion to Jehovah, their faith. That is what we build friendships on.
I have friends from different cultures, different races, and I don't see them as color, but I see my brother or my sister.
I've got the most amazing friendships with ones from different backgrounds and cultures, something I will always, always cherish.
So this was an infuriating little segment for me. In case you're unfamiliar, you have occasionally these lessons from the Watchtower where they speak to usually 3 different individuals from different parts of the world. And these individuals explain how they've had this problem, and only through the Watchtower study, the weekly study of the Watchtower, have they been able to crack the puzzle? Have they been able to overcome this problem that's been seemingly insurmountable? It's infuriating because, as you can imagine, usually these are problems that almost anyone could figure out by themselves, and people routinely do figure out by themselves. I mean, we're supposed to believe that only if you're a Jehovah's Witness can you be impartial regarding race and culture. Only if you're a Jehovah's Witness can you see past someone's skin colour or someone's background. Total nonsense. Yes, there will be bigoted people, but you will have bigoted people in all countries and in all walks of life, and frankly, in all religions. You will have bigoted people who are Jehovah's Witnesses. You're not necessarily going to know they're there, but trust me, they're there, because you have bad people in every walk of life, in every religion, and in every culture. You also have good people in every walk of life, in every religion, and in every culture. And what Jehovah's Witnesses are here trying to do is produce this piece of propaganda that says, we're this wonderful, multicultural, multi-ethnic organization. Of course you'd want to join us because we embrace everyone. And to some extent it's true. They are interested in recruiting everyone, regardless of what country they come from or regardless of their ethnicity. But one thing that you cannot say, and that's why this is an incredibly hypocritical and misleading segment, one thing you cannot say about Jehovah's Witnesses is that they are multicultural. You hear it routinely in their propaganda. It's simply not true. If there's anything in your culture that is perceived as having links with quote-unquote false religion or quote-unquote immorality, you have to get rid of it. You have to strip that element of your culture from you, from who you are. So the message here that Jehovah's Witnesses are this open-minded, tolerant, multicultural group is, I'm afraid, entirely misleading.
We know you'll enjoy the convention. And it's my pleasure to announce that we'll conclude the convention on Sunday with a new original song. The song and lyrics are now available on jw.org. The governing body requests that everyone in the congregation please practice the new song before going to the convention. If someone in your congregation needs help to download the song, please help them and practice with them. Then together, we'll sing out with all of our heart to Jehovah's praise. That brings this month's program to an end. Please know that the governing body loves all of you brothers and sisters very much. From the world headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses, this is JW Broadcasting.
I don't know how many of you will be rushing to download the original song, Our Joy Eternally, so that you can practice it and sing along when the convention, as we now know, is released online, not actually in physical events due to COVID-19 again. By all means, if that's the sort of thing you enjoy doing, I'm not going to stop you from practicing Our Joy Eternally, so that you can, sing out loud in your living rooms while the convention is in progress. But gosh, that was quite some JW Broadcasting episode. It's taken me a while to get around to doing this because it's tough. I hated watching it the first time, and the more I watch it, the more enraged I get, frankly. Particularly the coercion, the manipulation. We want you to be childlike. The contempt, the seeming contempt that Stephen Lett has for children, to the point of hating the fact that they play, hating the fact that they're curious. He can't stand them, but when they become young ones, when they become useful to him, that's when I'll start liking them. What an appalling, grotesque excuse for an individual that man is. The fact that such a tiny-brained charlatan can have so much control over millions of people, frankly, it bothers me. And sometimes it bothers me more than other times, and this time has been difficult for me to gather my thoughts, but gather them I have. Hopefully you found them interesting. The segment on disfellowshipping, on snitching on your sibling, on blowing things completely out of proportion, and treating your child as though he's some kind of psychopathic serial killer just because he's been to a party. That was also very disturbing, and I also don't appreciate the rewriting of history when it comes to the organization's track record on race. And that's not to say, by the way, that the organization isn't currently conspicuously multiracial, albeit you could argue not on the governing body. The governing body is predominantly white, apart from Sam Hurd. But certainly as far as the rank and file is concerned, it's conspicuously multiracial, but it hasn't always been that way. And I just hate, as someone who spent a lot of time studying the history of the organization, I don't appreciate witnesses being lied to. I don't appreciate witness parents being told what's good for their children, being told that they need to subject their children to graphic imagery depicting violence against those who question Jehovah. I hate all of that. It's been a particularly bad JW Broadcasting episode, but hopefully this rebuttal has been in some way helpful to you. Don't forget that you can subscribe to the John Cedars channel for more such videos, and as always, thank you for watching.